So if you guys want to mute yourselves, and then if you have questions, just remember to unmute. I'll definitely leave space for questions, but just that way, if people have random sounds, it doesn't hit the recording. So welcome, and today's session is going to be on journeying and the ins and outs of that, and then also a little bit about just sort of shamanism 101, just the basics of the cosmology and the practice and what that looks like. And then we'll do an actual journey later at the end of the session. And for the folks on the recording, I'll again apologize for the dark lighting. I'm recording this. I intended to be in my office. My office is a furnace. They've turned off the AC for the weekend. I'm at home right now, and the windows are all blanketed up and sealed up, so that's why it's so dark and the lighting is really poor. So I do apologize, and I apologize in advance if my dogs make any sounds that are distracting. This is just sort of the way we have to do things when it's over 100 degrees in Portland. So we'll go ahead and get started. Let's see. So let's go ahead and we'll just call in spirit and dedicate this session. So if everybody wants to just sort of settle in and find a comfortable spot. And if you like, you can close your eyes. Take a deep breath. Just feel the seat under you. Feeling into your body. Just taking a moment to be present. Now, in your mind's eye, imagine a large fire. Fire in a field, or maybe in an opening in a forest, meadow, however it appears to you. A beautiful, sacred fire. And around that fire is a flow, a circle of water, in whatever way that you see that. Feeling that sacredness of the water, hearing the sounds it makes, feeling that fluid energy. And feel the earth there below your feet. Feeling that solid, nurturing essence of the earth. And feeling a gentle breeze, clean, crisp air flowing around you. Taking in that life-giving oxygen that feeds us, sustains us. And imagine now that we're all in a circle together around that fire. All the people on this call, and leaving space for all the people that will watch this recording later. Knowing that in non-ordinary reality, there's no such thing as time. So we can be here now with all the people who are watching this later. And send out your love to all the people in the circle. Love and gratitude for their presence, for their showing up today, whatever day that is. And now open and feel the love of everyone in the circle coming to you. Opening and receiving that love and gratitude from everyone now in the circle, everyone in the future circle. And now we call in the spirit helpers of everyone in this circle. We ask Spirit to help us form a loving and supportive community. We ask for guidance and support in building connections with one another and with building connections with our spirit guides. We ask for help creating open, clear communication with spirit helpers so that we can be guided in our lives towards being our best selves. And we offer gratitude for the people in the circle. We offer gratitude to the spirit helpers in the circle who have come to support us. Good. Now bringing yourself back into the present moment. Take a deep breath and open your eyes. Thank you, guys. So today we're going to I'll start off with talking about shamanism and just sort of the history of it, what it is, what we do with it, what it means. So a little bit of the history. Every culture has had a shamanic past. So when you study back far enough, all the way back to the Paleolithic times, we've always had shamanic cultures, whether it's Native American cultures, African cultures, Celtic cultures. You flow things back far enough, and there's always a shaman and a shamanic practice. So it's really a very both fluid practice, meaning that it changes from across history from generation to generation, but it also changes across culture to culture. And so every different culture has its own iterations, but the basics are mostly the same, which is using either dance, drumming, song, or in some places shaking to induce a trance-like state in order to connect with spirit. Um, Often there is an individual, so a specific shaman or a few shamans in the culture who took the extra time to really develop those connections and to spend time in non-ordinary reality, um, which is just that place where spirit resides, where we can connect with spirit. It's kind of, I use that non-ordinary reality interchangeably with the imaginal realm. It's all, in my mind, it's all the same. Some people are very specific about nomenclature. I am not. Um, so whether you just think of it as an imaginal realm or an actual place in non-ordinary reality, really doesn't matter. The results are the same. The effects are the same. You can connect with spirit, and you can connect and build relationships and find answers and find support there. So those in those cultures, there often was one person or a few people who either naturally were able to just tap into that, or had training to tap into that, and really spend a lot of time building and getting used to that, building relationships, getting used to what it's like in non-ordinary reality, and then being able to bring back healings, guidance, messages, prophecy, all different kinds of things to the group. But anyone can do it, and it doesn't take any special talent. It's just like anything else. The more you practice it, the better you get at it. um, so my background starts with Michael Harner, who brought shamanism, or some people call it neo-shamanism, but brought it kind of into the everyday culture in the West. And so who he was an anthropologist who studied amongst multiple different indigenous tribes that were still existing at the time. I want to say this is the 70s. Don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% sure, but late 60s, early 70s is around when he was doing his research and as an anthropologist. And he'd studied in multiple different cultures that were very different from one another geographically, and then also in a lot of, they're far apart, they don't know one another, there is no contact with each other. Nevertheless, he saw this similarity, this basis of practice that was the same no matter where he went and where he studied. And so he created from that what he called core shamanism. And so you'll hear a lot of different terms of shamanism. There's folks who have studied specifically with a culture in the Andes Mountains in South America. Um, those folks practice a very specific kind of shamanism that's based in the cultures, the practices, the deities of that culture, and then will teach that. So there are definitely some folks that are prominent in the United States who teach from that practice. I've seen a few folks that have different practices that come from Africa. Um, there's obviously still some working Native American tribes that do practice shamanism. Some of them just within their own groups, and some of them teach them openly. Um, the Tibetan Buddhists have their own form of shamanism. Um, so you'll hear a lot of different specific kinds of shamanism. What I practice is what Michael Harner created as core shamanism, and that's just again the basics of getting into a trance state, using that to talk and build and foster relationships with spirit that you can then use in your everyday life. So you can journey, which is an intentional visiting to that non-ordinary realm when you're in an altered state, but then things like our daily rituals and the altar building that we talked about in the last session, that's what kind of brings that into your everyday life. So you don't have to journey all the time to get to know answers. You can kind of build those relationships so that you can intuitively know when your spirits are around. You can call on them for support and different things. So um, that's sort of the basics. Another name I'll throw out. So Michael Harner taught Sandra Ingerman, and Michael Harner has passed, but Sandra Ingerman is a very active teacher in the United States who she has taught thousands of people who have gone on to be teachers who have taught other people. And that's the folks that I have learned from, by and large, all learned directly from Sandra Ingerman. And so that's sort of my lineage, if you want to think of it that way. But core shamanism is kind of what I come from. I have some general ideas of some other types of shamanism, but if you have questions about different types, I'd probably be more likely to send you to other folks who teach those things. Mine is a little bit washed of a specific cultural background. Um, let's see. So what shamanism is for individuals today who are learning and practicing it is a direct revelation. What that means is just being able to get answers from spirit directly. So a lot of different dogmas and religions practice things you have to do through other people in order to get guidance or forgiveness or whatever. Shamanism is a way of just connecting with your own spirit directly. And then anything that you do, if you have any practices, any rituals, any ceremonies, then you can tailor them according to what your spirit guides specifically say for you. Which for me, I think that's a really beautiful system. And you'll hear me say a lot when people have questions, one of the first things I'll say is, have you journeyed on that? Have you asked your spirit guides? Because once you build that relationship, that's where the best answers can come. And I can definitely give you, guidance and some signposts along the way of what's helpful for journeying, what's helpful for connecting with spirit, things like that. But ultimately, if I say anything and your spirit guides contrast that with something else, throw out what I said and just go with what spirit tells you directly. Because that's the whole point, is just that direct revelation, being able to get your information directly. Some of the other things that I feel shamanism brings to the table is a sense of connection to a wider web of life. We're all in the food chain, and we're connected to everything in nature. And this is a way of taking that idea and then also realizing that we're connected to one another, that we're all part of the same spiritual web of life, that when you're working with spirit, and it just brings us that sense that it opens you up to a wider perspective of what life is and what life can be, opening us up to more of a larger sense of spiritual purpose, and a feeling of connectedness is what I feel it brings. Everyone's going to have their own individual experience. But it also, I've also felt a lot of sense of purpose, because since I can ask my spirit guides for help on what to do next as far as where my life should go, and what directions to take and things like that on everything large and small, it helps me feel that there's a little bit of a purpose. And by that, I don't necessarily mean that everything is pre-planned destiny. I don't believe that. But I do think that there are some sort of life paths that make things a little easier for us, that are, if we go right, that's the easier way because we're in the flow with things, rather than beating our heads against things that are just simply not going to work out, or not for us, or not the right path. So I tend to think of both. We have free will and we can do what we want with our life, but there are also certain lessons that we're supposed to learn, call it karma or whatever. And that's where our guides can help point us in the right direction. So rather than beating our head against the wall, going the wrong way again and again and again until we finally learn that lesson and change direction, we can get those answers more quickly and have less of a bruised forehead and a dent in a brick wall. So that's sort of just the purpose, the why of shamanism. So getting into some of the cosmology, again, this is from the idea of core shamanism, and you're going to find other cultures might have different iterations of this. But in core shamanism, generally people find that there are two types of spirits. There's power animals, which I talked a little bit about in the last session. And then there's spirit helpers, or I also use that term interchangeably with guides or spirit guides. The spirit helpers are going to probably appear more as a human. If you are visual, some people don't get visuals at all, and that's okay. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But they tend to be more in a human form, whereas power animals are obviously more in an animal form. Power animals, the cosmology with core shamanism, and a lot of shamanisms in different cultures, is that people are born with a power animal that enters into this world with you. A power animal is not a specific spirit of a specific animal. So in other words, one of my animals that I work with is wolf, and I think of that as wolf with a capital W. So not a specific wolf that lived on the earth and died and now I'm working with the ghost or the spirit of that wolf. That's not what it is. It's more like the essence of wolf, like the spirit of wolf, all of wolf. If you think of like the ancestral wolf on like a larger scale, that's what a power animal is. And they work with us whether we know that they are there or not. So if even if you never know what your power animal is, the idea is that they're always there supporting and helping you. But of course, again, if you can foster that relationship and start to kind of understand its voice, if you will, or its essence, what the way it speaks to you, the way it communicates, the more you can understand that, then the more you can build that relationship and get that support becomes easier, because you can actually understand what it's trying to say or how it's trying to move you or what's happening, rather than it trying to support you in ways that you maybe don't know about and maybe aren't responding to. Any questions so far? Okay. So with animal spirits, or animal power animals, I know that there's a lot of information out there about certain animals have certain meanings, like they're a symbol. If you see a raven, it means this thing. Or there are shamanic cards that you can pull different animals and they have different meanings. And if you're using it in the context of that divinatory realm, fine, that's awesome. But when it comes to power animals in this way, there's no symbol. They are, like I said, wolf with a capital W or fish with a capital F. They're not meant to be one symbol of one thing. They are a support that's there for you, to help you. And so try not to fall into that trap of trying to read into, if you have a certain animal, this is what it means. All it means is that's what your helper is. And we tend to, as humans, rank animals in certain ways, and, a predator is stronger and fiercer and more powerful than a squirrel. But that's not the way it is in non-ordinary reality. In non-ordinary reality, this is an animal, it's here to support you, it's here to help you, and they're all equal and they're all connected, and there's no they're not eating one another in a non-ordinary reality. So if you have an animal, love whichever one you get. It doesn't, don't worry about it being any statement on you or your power or the abilities of the animal itself. There's no one is stronger than the other. Any questions on any of that? Okay. So moving on to the second type, which are spirit teachers or guides. These tend to be where power animals tend to, you usually have one that you're born with that sticks with you your whole life. You may have one or even a couple others that come and go and or stay, but there's usually not a whole plethora of power animals. You kind of stick with what you've got. And again, occasionally one might phase out or phase in, but that's not super common. It does happen occasionally. With spirit teachers, that's much more fluid. They can be anything from soul families, so folks that you've reincarnated with in the past that are not incarnate now, but are, their job is to help you, and you've probably done the same for them in different incarnations. They could be deities, and deities are our spirit guides. I use those interchangeably. The difference between a spirit guide generally and a deity is that deities have come about through certain cultures. So if you're working with Odin, that's from the Nordic culture. If you're working with Ganesh, that's from the Hindu and the Indian culture. They can be just as helpful. They do tend to be tied to their specific culture. So if you're working with Ganesh and you're giving an offering, I mean, give him whatever he asks for, but it's don't be surprised if it has some kind of, if he wants curry or something that has an Indian bent to it. The other thing with deities is that so yeah, I guess I won't get into that too much. We can talk more about that. That can be a whole program. But with deities, they, along with their cultural ties, they often have, I'm going to use the word personality, but I'm use that really loosely. But the sort of a personality that's also tied to the culture. So in other words, you might work with a warrior deity who, they're going to have that warrior side to them. They're going to be very different than working with a guide that is more gentle and, warm and fuzzy. So just know that if you can work with any guide. As far as when we think of appropriation is a really important concept for us as humans working with one another as other humans. In core shamanism, the idea is that if a deity calls on you and you're not from that culture, if it taps you, that's, in non-ordinary reality, once we die and we shed our skin, we don't have a race, we don't have a culture, we don't have a heritage. So if you're doing something in the human realm and you've been taught something, you're being taught someone, say by a Native American, you do want to be sensitive on who can I teach this to? Am I allowed to talk about it? Am I allowed to practice it? Go with it within their parameters, because then you're working human to human. But if you're working and you're journeying and you're asking for guidance from a specific guide, or no, you're not asking for a specific guide, you're asking for just someone to show up to help you with, say, a certain project, and it's a Celtic deity or a Norse deity or whatever, then if they showed up for you, in my opinion, that's fine. So that's my little spiel on appropriation. It's sticky and it's tricky as far as it's an important concept in the human realm. It's not an important concept to spirit. So just be mindful of where you're getting your teachings from and what permissions you have to use them or share them. Any questions on that so far? Okay. So other spirit teachers or guides, they could be angels, they could be ancestors, they could be all kinds of different things. Some folks work with, actually that's more in the middle realm in the middle world, but which we'll get into. But some folks even work with like the fae, like fairies and goblins and non-ordinary creatures that we know from folklore, but that different cultures definitely have strong beliefs in. Some cultures don't. We tend to not believe in them in the West, but I definitely have seen folks who have powerful journeys and work with them. I don't know a ton about it because that's not my forte, but those are other potential spiritual guides out there for you. Um, so let's see. Okay. The next piece of cosmology are the worlds that you journey to. So when you journey, it's putting you into a non-ordinary reality, and you're in your imaginal realm, in your mind's eye. You're going while in a trance state to these other worlds. Um, Worlds has air quotes around it because it's non-physical reality, right? So it's going to be experienced differently for each person. But there's an upper, middle, and a lower. Middle world is our world where we live, which I'll go over that last. So there's the upper and the lower. A lot of folks. So in my experience and talking to some of the shamanic practitioners that have worked in this practice for a long time, there doesn't tend to be a lot of difference between the upper and the lower as far as what you can achieve. It's not like you have to go to the lower world to have this certain thing or go into the upper world. There's some traditional things like when you first do an animal retrieval, that tends to be in the lower world. But if you went into the upper world to do that, it wouldn't matter. The spirits that you work with can go either way, they can go in either direction. Um, a lot of people, when they're visualizing things in the lower world, they tend to see earthy things like you come out into a beautiful meadow or a forest or a beach or something like that, whereas the upper world, sometimes people will see more celestial type visualizations like a crystal castle or something like that. None of it matters as far as you can accomplish things in either way. For me personally, so what I'll say is, just in order to really know what it means for you, I again would ask you to just check in with your guide, ask them what the differences are, ask them if you should go in to upper or to lower for any specific thing you're trying to do. And then just maybe set some intentions for journeys just to visit the lower world and just to visit the upper world and see how that feels to you. I do tend to, and this is just my perspective, it's totally open to being different for any of you, but for me, the lower world feels a little bit denser and more physical. So if I'm, say, asking something that's very mundane, very everyday sort of things, like should I open my office on Saturday hours or should I not? Something that's very practical like that. Then I would go to the lower world for that because that's more like it's heavier and denser in a way that our everyday lives are. And then I would go to the upper world for something more larger scale life purposey, like if I were to ask, what is my life purpose, or something really kind of grand scale, something like that, something about maybe a past life I want to know about, then I'd go into the upper world because that has more of that larger perspective. Again, that's just the way I experienced it. There's really no wrong way to do it, and you want to just let your guides guide you. And what I've said this in the past, and I'll say it probably 1,000 more times. It's really your intention that matters, and your energy follows intention. So any spirit that you work with can meet you in either upper or lower world or middle world. And you just want to set your intention of what it is that you're journeying for. If it's a question, if you're journeying to do something creative, just let your spirit guide know, and then just trust where it takes you. And maybe you don't even know. To be honest, most of the time I don't even ask for clarification where I'm at, because that's not as important to me as just the messages that I'm getting. But again, that's me. Some folks really like to, they enjoy the details and they want to know which world they're going into, and they enjoy knowing the differences. And I know folks that just do a lot of exploring, that just take journeys just for the purpose of getting to know those worlds. And I even know one person who's mapped them out and does all of these really elaborate drawings and maps of all these different things in the different worlds, which is Awesome. So do whatever feels right for you. Just know that, again, there's no wrong way to do it. And you just want to let your guides guide you. So middle world, the reason that I do this last, I think I mentioned this in the last call. Um, the middle world has really amazing, beautiful things. It's where you can connect with plant spirits, land spirits. There's river spirits, mountain spirits, all kinds of features of the land have specific spirits. A lot of cultures have deities that are connected to them. In Hawaii, there's a lot of deities for specific volcanoes. So if you're taking a trip to Hawaii or someplace, if you're taking a trip anywhere, you can always travel in the middle world, do a journey to where you're going, and just get to kind of know the land spirits there. Is one great way of doing middle world. A lot of people use it for plants. A lot of people talk to plants and get plant medicine. And traditionally, that was a really important part of shamanism in ancient cultures, was getting to know what plants to use medicinally in different ways. Probably what plants are not edible or are edible when different cultures were moving into new areas where they were encountering new plant life. So that's middle world. The other thing that is in middle world are stuck humans. um, so that's when you get your ghosts and things that are, so there can be, again, this is my cosmology, so open to interpretation, but in my experience, there's two different kinds of categories for things that get stuck in the middle world. And that is us, just people who have passed on and have not either. Generally what tends to happen is they're they're too stuck in their life. They don't want to move on. They don't want to be dead. They don't want to experience anything else. Their desire to get back into their life is stronger than anything else, and it keeps them tied to the earth. The other thing that can happen is people or energy trauma. So it's not always an individual person who's stuck there. Like their soul it's not always that. But if you have a just really violent or traumatic incident in an area, that energy can create a disturbance in that area. It kind of makes a fingerprint of energy in that area that almost keeps replaying like a record. And that can be scary to encounter as well. So what I would suggest that you get to know your spirit guide really well and do a lot of journeying in upper or lower world, and get to understand how to call that spirit and how to follow it and how to respond to your spirit guide before you do anything in the middle world. And I don't mean to make it sound like this foreboding place. Just be aware that there are some frightening things and some things that are some of those folks who have passed over that don't know that they're passed over, when they can sometimes recognize someone who's in the imaginal realm in non-ordinary reality and sort of stick to you. They're trying to get back in however they can. And so if they encounter someone who is living, who does have a body, it can stick to you. So if you're with your spirit guide and you set your intention really clearly, I want to get to know the tree in my backyard, and you set that intention and you first call in your power animal helper, shouldn't be a problem. You just let them know to keep you safe, and they'll do that, and you'll be able to connect with the tree or the land or whatever it is that you're connecting with, and it shouldn't be a problem. But that's why I say just make sure that you have that strong connection with your spirit guide first, so that you don't end up encountering scary things or having things kind of stick to you that you don't want to bring back home with you. Any questions on any of that? Yes.
So when you say trauma, is it like our own personal trauma or just any kind of traumas of anyone could be in there?
So either or, it's usually big trauma. So our thoughts are energy. Everything that we think and feel creates a vibration, an energy around us. So there's little traumas all the time. There's times where any of us get in a really depressed state or a bad mood, or we're super angry. We're creating like little vibrations, ripples of energy around us. But usually those are very fluid, right? And we keep moving on, and we move on to the next thing. And a few minutes later, we're happier, or the next day, or whatever. If you have a place where, say there was a person living in a home who was a very, very depressed person, or a very, very angry person, who had super strong emotions that were always flowing out in that place all the time for years, that place is probably going to have some of that energy is going to stick to the physicality around it, the floors, the ceiling, the physical things, because everything, when you get down to the smallest minute level, everything's vibration, right? We found that out in science. When you get back into the tiniest piece of an atom, there's no actual particle there, it's just vibration. And so that our vibrations can get into physical matter and stick there. I would usually, it's something pretty intense in order to really to stick around and to stay there for years and years and years. Think of it almost like a smell. Smells can get into fabric and can stick around, but usually it has to be pretty intense and ongoing for years to make walls and paint and flooring and everything smell for decades, right? It has to be pretty intense for that. So
Okay.
if there's a trauma, if there's natural catastrophe, and a town got wiped out by a mudslide, those are big traumas. Those are things where there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of intense emotion, there's a lot of, there might even be stuck individuals who don't know that they're still, they may know, they may not know, but they don't want to move on one way or another. So that's, yeah, it's usually big trauma like that, something like, a mass shooting, things that could leave a lot of trauma behind. But people's individual trauma can also stick in a smaller area, like a room or a house, if they spend a lot of time feeling those emotions, feeling and having those negative thoughts, whether it's, fear, anger, sadness, on an ongoing basis. Does that make sense?
I mean, kind of. Still kind of processing it all.
What can I do to help clarify?
Well, I guess I'm not sure when you're saying house and a room, if you're talking about like a house or a room you're going to encounter in the middle, or like actual, or both, maybe.
Yeah, so when you're in the middle realm, there are people who do cleansings. There are shamanic practitioners who do cleansings of houses and things like that. And that can
Hmm.
be anything from, so there's a shamanic practitioner called a psychopomp. That is a person who releases spirits that are still stuck. Those are people who go in and convince them as much as possible, you are dead, go towards the light. That's a very oversimplified version, but that's
Yeah.
basically what they do. And so there could be house clearing done in that way if there's an
Hmm.
actual, I'm going to say soul or entity, whatever you want to call it. And then there's the traumatic kind are, again, if you bought a house of someone who lived there a really long time, and there was just, let's say there's a lot of abuse in the house, and anger and fear, you have family members fearing the abuser, and the abuser stewing in anger, and all,
Right.
yeah, that house might have a feeling to it, where if you were to enter that house in the middle world, again, you can ask your spirit helper to, tamp those things down for you, or just to let you know there's some, negative vibes in this house.
Right.
Usually, if it's just something like that, it's just going to be a little bit of a feeling, like just a sense of it not being quite right. But now, if
Hmm.
there's a murder, if there's something
Hmm.
really very violent and very sudden, then sometimes those things can leave such an impression that it's almost a broken record, where you'll hear sometimes where people talk about hauntings, where they keep seeing the same person. A person walks into the room, stumbles back and then disappears into the floor, and then they
Hmm.
see that thing again the next night, or some other person comes in at the home or the hotel or the whatever and experiences that
Hmm.
same thing. That is not a stuck spirit usually, because they're not, those stuck spirits move around and do different things. They're more
Hmm.
active, they're more
Hmm.
but that event might just keep happening. The murder you might just see over and
Right.
over, and that's sort of that. In that case, that's probably that person has passed on, the murdered individual, but that trauma, the intenseness of the sudden fear and the sudden trauma has made an impression in the has been stuck in that building and is replaying itself because it's just so intense. Whereas just that house with an abusive father and kids that were scared and a wife that was scared, um, assuming that it's not violent on the level of that, that level,
Right.
if it's just your everyday abuse, that sounds horrible, but just somebody who's uses his hands to hit occasionally, and or her, I don't mean to make this a gender issue, but that kind of thing is just going to be a house that maybe just has some kind of lower energy, feels a little bit icky, but you're not going to have the same patterns of things over and over and over and experiencing them, which in the non-ordinary reality, in the case of the murdered person, if you go into that place and that is repeating itself, you might experience that, you might see that in the same way that a person,
Hmm.
and it goes into a haunted house and can see something happen. Does that help
Okay.
clarify?
Yeah, I don't know if there's an answer to this question, but like I've been looking for a rental house, and some people will let me stay in there and take my time, and some people, want want you to get out in 15 minutes. And part of my thing too is like I need to get a feel for the house. Like I don't know if I exactly thought of it in what you're describing, but that's kind of resonating with me, is like, yeah, I have to kind of feel the energy of the house, and I don't usually feel like I can do that in 15 minutes. So
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you have I don't know if there's an answer, like how long it takes to feel the house.
Well, if you get to really know a spirit guide, so two suggestions. One, you could get to know your spirit guide and you could do a journey to the middle world when you know you're going to visit an address. And then that way you can spend time in non-ordinary reality in that place
Okay.
and get a feel for it. Um, or you can have someone do that for you. If you want someone who does that work, you can have them go to that place and get a feel for it and let you know what kind of energy is there. But ultimately, any way around it, it can always be cleared. So just
Oh,
know
okay.
that if the vibe is, if you get in there, if you pick a place and you get in there and it doesn't feel that good, there are
Mhm.
definitely folks who specialize in getting rid of that energy. It can be transmuted out of it. So
Okay.
yeah. So I'm gonna go ahead and move on because I want to keep us on a time frame. But definitely after the call, after our official session, if you want to ask other specific things, then we can stay on the call and talk about it some more. Does anybody else have any questions right now? Okay. So that's kind of the three worlds that people get to. I wanted to also just show you this book, and I'll tell you that. So it's Shamanic Journeying, a Beginner's Guide, and it's by Sandra Ingerman, who is that person that I talked about, who is one of the major teachers in the United States of core shamanism, who's taught lots and lots of teachers. Um, so if you're interested, that is a really great book that gets into everything I'm talking about now, but with a little more detail. And she also has some really awesome anecdotes where she talks about her experiences when she was first starting out, which are, I think, helpful.